Okay, so first question. Who are you?
My name's David Sproxton. I'm co-founder and executive chairman of Aardman Animations here in Bristol.
Okay. So when you were younger, what was your dream? Who did you want to be?
I wanted to be somebody like Freddie Young, actually. I wanted to be a well-known DOP. Freddie Young shot a lot of David Lean films. Particularly, I remember seeing Lawrence of Arabia, Dr. Zhivago, Ryan's Daughter. These quite big epics that he did. And as a youngster, seeing these films, particularly the early ones, Lawrence of Arabia, probably didn't understand what a director was, but what I saw on screen was quite impressive, and I thought that's kind of what I want to do. And my father was actually a BBC producer, but also quite a keen amateur photographer. So we had a darkroom at home, and I was quite interested in photography and light. So that kind of was what the appeal was to me, was capturing images on film.
Okay. So, when did you start,
When did I start? Probably playing. Well, funnily enough, I found an old negative I shot when I was probably about 9, of a schoolmaster on a field, not on a field trip, on a school trip, and my father had given me a little second-hand 35mm camera, Wachi 127 camera, with one of those little fold-out flash heads. You've probably never seen these things, but they kind of folded a bit like a fan. It was like a chrome foil thing, had batteries in it and a capacitor, and it took individual blue magnesium flash bulbs. You open this thing up and it sat on top of the camera. And that photograph, which is a flash photograph taken us in a train, probably going through something like Box Tunnel, actually. It's quite a long tunnel. I remember when that came out, I remember being quite impressed by it. I think, oh my God, yes, that was a bit of a chancy photograph to take, because I'd never really used flash before. And I came across that negative literally a few weeks ago. So I do remember there were a couple of things. So doing photography with my father in the darkroom and seeing photographs come up. And then there was another moment when I was taken up to the Science Museum in London, and there was a little model diorama of a scene from Julius Caesar or something like that. Quite a small model, actually. It's only a yard or so across. But with a very simple, what they call a 6x1, you could change the emotional state just through the change of coloured lighting on it. Nothing else changed, bar the lighting of the background or the lighting on the characters. And they had a range of colours that you could mix, and you could alter the brightness on it. And again, I was probably 6 or 7 years old when I came across this thing. And I was quite intrigued by the way in which you could change your emotional... I couldn't articulate it, but you could change your emotional reading of a scene just through the use of light, and particularly colour and light.
Okay. What inspired your career choice?
What was the inspiration for the career? It was sort of, we kind of fell into it. I remember quite early on, I was intrigued, I think, by the process of filmmaking. I say my father was a documentary filmmaker for the BBC, doing quite high-level sort of theological programs. I never quite understood the content, because the content went right over my head. He was dealing with philosophers and theologians. But the process intrigued me, and occasionally I'd go up and he'd be doing, a sound mix or something like that. And I say the photography side was the most intriguing. So that was, I guess, part of my inspiration. These big films like, I say, Lawrence of Arabia were also inspirational. And then the idea that you could do a lot of it yourself, you didn't need a big crew. So when I met Peter Lord, who I met at school, at secondary school, grammar school, we started playing around. My father had a clockwork wind-up Bolex camera, very versatile camera that can do, shoot cinefilm, and you could do stop frame on it. You can animate on it. And we just started playing around with that one Easter holiday. And what was fun was that, the two of us, you could get an effect, you can get results without having to have a whole kind of film crew. And I think then we sort of realised you can create these little worlds, and you can create characters and put life into them. And you didn't have to have a full crew, actors, sound people. You could do an awful lot of it yourself. And that, I think, became, in a way, the fun of it all. It was like a hobby. It was just a fun type hobby, which was a bit magical, a bit like, in the days when black and white photography, you could see the images come up in a developing dish. again, with animation, you had to send the film off to the lab. You didn't see anything of what you were doing as you were doing it. You waited, in our case, probably about a week or so. So it was quite magical when it came back and all these things were leaping about on screen.
Okay.
1 second, let me just check.
Okay. How did you start? Like, how did you manage to start doing it as like a proper career? Like,
Well, we were lucky in getting a break with a show called Vision On, which was a show actually recorded in Bristol. We were living in the suburbs of London at the time, but produced actually in London. And it used a lot of kind of amateur animation. It was a very visual show, and there were 5 or 6 animation contributors to it. And we got to know the producer, and he'd seen some of the stuff that we'd been mucking around with, and he gave us the opportunity to, hear the themes of the next series, and here's a roll of film, have a crack at it, and we'll see how it goes from there. So we looked at these themes, and we did all sorts of techniques. We did chalk drawings, pixelation, when you get people to effectively be your puppets. We didn't do any puppet animation. It was mostly drawn and cut out stuff. And a 2D cell animation, a kind of classical cell animation featuring this character, Aardman, who was a sort of superhero. So we got a break. They bought that Aardman sequence, which is why the company's called Aardman Animations. And we then did the following season's 13 shows. We did 13 one-minute episodes, broadly about a minute, featuring Aardman, this 2D idiotic Superman character. And that led on to doing more work for Vision On. It wasn't terribly well paid, but it's the equivalent of a kind of almost like a summer job. We took a year out between school and university, and that's what we did in that year, or at least over 5, 6 or 7 months. And we then went to college, and we continued to make films for Vision On in our summer holidays. We'd probably do probably a couple of sequences a week, something like that. Try to do a full 13 in that period. And then when we left college, that show actually folded, but it turned into Take Heart, which in turn became Heartbeat. And it's in Take Heart that we invented Morph. And that led on, we did quite a lot of Morph, and then that led on to a Morph series. And then Channel 4 came along in the early 80s. And we'd made a couple of experimental films with a producer here in Bristol based on real life recordings, sort of documentary soundtrack, which we animated to. And those got seen by the then commissioning editor and the chief exec of Channel 4, Jeremy Isaacs, and Paul Madden, the other way around, who commissioned actually 5 short films based on that same technique, and later another 5 films, out of which came Creature Comforts. So that is a kind of potted history. And from Channel 4, the Channel 4 films went out at 9 o'clock at night across a week, and they started being seen by ad agency people, so we got into doing TV commercials, kind of on the back of the Channel 4 work, and we've kept doing adverts actually to this day because it's a very good training ground, and B, it pays the rent. So we did quite a lot of commercial work, and then Nick had joined us earlier, I think in 1985, and we'd helped him finish his graduation film, which is A Grand Day Out. So if you're doing animation, we'll try and make a film as good as Grand Day Out. And on the basis of that, we then talked to the BBC and said, we'd like to do another film based on these 2 characters, which became The Wrong Trousers.
Okay. When you decided you wanted to have a creative career, was everyone supportive, or did you find that you were looked down on?
Well, I was very lucky, and Pete was quite lucky as well. Both of our mothers taught art at... I think Pete's mother's more secondary, my mother's more primary school teaching. And say my father was a producer. And we were encouraged to kind of follow our instincts rather than become a lawyer or an accountant. So we were both kind of lucky enough to have parents which didn't say, get yourself a proper job, get yourself a trade. They kind of were encouraged us. They did encourage. It certainly weren't discouraging. So that was good. And in those days, I mean, at school when we were doing these little sequences for Vision On, I remember the headmaster called us into his office and sort of gave us a bit of a dressing down because he thought we were kind of going to end up, in the gutter, poor. The media industries or the creative industries, that term wasn't even invented in the 60s. It was it was quite hard. In fact, the careers evenings were basically, the services, the professions, lawyers, accountants, banking, teaching. Nobody at grammar school really knew anything about how you might get into theatre or how you might become a journalist or how you might get into television or film. It just wasn't on their radar at all. So I wouldn't say there was a bit of discouragement from school. One of the major bits of encouragement we got from school was we were screening some of these silly films we'd made just silently. We just put on a Charlie Parker soundtrack to them. And our biology master, a guy called Mr. Fudge, who was quite a stern fellow, but actually played a pretty mean violin, walked across the back of the hall. And this is like a sixth form social thing we were doing. Stopped and watched for a few minutes and actually laughed. And we thought, that's good. That is positive, encouragement for us. And that's about all the encouragement we got from school. But for my parents, I say we were lucky. They were hopeful that things would work out. And in fact, they did.
Why do you feel like film and animation is so important?
Did we ever feel it was important? Did we feel film and animation was important? I suppose, I don't know whether we ever felt that. I guess we felt an attraction to it and a desire to push it along. Having said that, there are quite big stories you can tell and there are worlds that you can create, and it does go across the world. I mean, Shaun the Sheep, has no language in it whatsoever, and that's sold to 170 countries worldwide. So with animation, and actually film in general, it is a universal sort of medium, and you can tell quite big stories with it. And it's interesting, the BAFTAs were held last night, and it's interesting seeing those films which were getting awarded were quite stories with quite big stories, films with quite big stories in them, quite big ideas behind them. And I guess they reach people. There's a network. I don't think when we set out we said, "Oh, we're going to do important stuff. We're going to make animated films." No, I think we thought, let's see what we can do. We can see if we can make it work.
Okay. What do you feel like animation, short films, and film in general can do?
Well, yeah, short films actually, I think are a great way of expressing ideas. Particularly when you see films from overseas and you see their cultures and the way they think and the way they operate and the issues they have. I mean, everybody, all families, all people have broadly the same sort of issues: eating, feeding, getting a family off to school in the morning, that kind of stuff. And then there's a whole load of cultural nuance. And I think it's great. It encounters here in Bristol in particular, where you see overseas short films and you just see a different way of life. So it gives you a perspective on the world. Short films for me, they're also a great training ground. Do lots of them, I would say. Don't think about, hey, I'm going to make a feature film now. Feature films are huge things to take on. Not necessarily in the production. In the production bit of films, broadly, is a doable thing. Anybody can kind of make a film of some description one way or the other. The hard bit is getting a good story and getting the scripts and the writing right. And actually, we would say that in our animated films, the feature films, it's probably a 3-year journey to get a decent script. So how do you learn that trade? How do you learn that craft? It's actually doing lots of shorter stories and understanding story structures and character beats, character arcs, and then gradually building up to bigger stories, which is kind of what Nick did actually with his half hours and then Chicken Run and then Curse the Were Rabbit, having the confidence to tell a bigger tale in a longer length of time.
Okay. What's your favourite piece of work you've worked on or done?
What's my favourite piece of work? There are kind of quite a lot. I mean, as we kind of co-created Morph, I'm still very fond of Morph because it's as simple as it gets. It's just a very basic character. And it's slapstick. And he works in kind of 1-minute segments. So I'm very fond of Morph. We talk a lot about The Wrong Trousers as a half-hour short. And almost by accident, it's a real gem of a film. It's a very simple idea. 3 characters, 1 speaking part. It's a genre, it's a heist movie. And there isn't a shot in it you don't need. It's a very sort of concise, efficient, but highly entertaining film, and that film still is a kind of high point for us, actually.
Okay. I guess it's a similar question, but like, is there anything you're particularly proud of you've done?
Well, winning a few Oscars is always good.
Yeah.
The bigger films, keeping going. We're 40 years old this year, so keeping going is something to be quite proud of, to be honest. And actually getting feature films out up against the Hollywood studios, which are huge and are massively resourced. We had a good deal with DreamWorks, but our films were much lower budget than theirs, but competing with them on the same level. And I think what we learned, about storytelling and about filmmaking, certainly during our 10 years with DreamWorks, was phenomenal. And in a way, putting British animation kind of on the map. It hadn't, America had run away with it with Disney from the 50s onwards, really. And although we were doing shorts in the UK, particularly with Channel 4 in the mid-80s to early 90s, it wasn't really... Well, it hasn't, there's a kind of a gap. We weren't really boxing above our weight for quite some time. Now with the tax break in place, particularly for kids' TV and features, again, Britain's sort of on the rise with animation. There are huge gaps in the writing side, but it's quite good to have been part of that movement.
Okay. With the knowledge you have now, is there anything you would do differently if you could? Like,
Yeah, that's a good question. What would we do different? I think, how quickly what you don't know when you're starting out is what you don't know.
Yeah.
There's kind of unknown knowns or known unknowns, but actually you don't know how much there is to learn. And it's a mistake actually a lot of filmmakers make. They go to college, they come out, they do their 3 years, they think they're equipped to make films, and they want to make, say, a feature film. And we would say to people, no, don't even think about that for about 5 or 10 years. You'll generally fall flat on your face because there's an awful lot to learn. And I think that's probably, looking back, that's what we didn't know then. I mean, there's a great joy in the naivety because you just plough on regardless, which is great, and you learn on the way. Anything we wouldn't have done? No, it was when we started, it was a very different world. So it's about taking opportunities that came up, and the Channel 4 opportunity was very good, and that took us in good stead. We would probably, looking back, had taken on kind of more staff earlier to help us through. Finding really good people, surrounding yourself with really good skills is the secret. And filmmaking is a very collaborative process. So probably in our early years in Bristol, we might have taken on a few more people, but the budgets we were working for, particularly on the Morph series, were so tight, they were so small, we could hardly afford to pay ourselves anyway. So, but I think, I don't know, it's always difficult. It's good to, what would you do? Could have done something completely different. Could have, I don't know, been an airline pilot or something. Very different trajectory.
If you could talk to like all young directors, producers, filmmakers, what advice would you say to them?
Keep practicing, actually. Keep at it. Surround yourself with those people that are better at doing the things that you can't do. Find out what your real skill is and what drives you. And that might be writing, it might be filming, it might be designing. Work collaboratively, and we see this at the National Film School where they work very collaboratively across all the grades. And kind of keep at it. It's a process of, we were lucky. After Channel 4, we did a lot of commercial work, TV commercials. Now they're pretty highly funded. You're working with quite top dog ad agencies and very creative directors. So they push you quite hard. And that was a good thing to do. We learned an awful lot in the 90s when we were shooting a lot of commercial work about all sorts of things, how films work, production values, all that kind of thing, and observing others. I think, I remember going up to quite big shoots in London and just watching the DOPs work and sort of learning lots of tricks of the trade through observation. But I think really it's kind of keep at it. Don't try and do everything yourself. You'll find other people out there that are great at doing the stuff that you're not so good at doing. You know, and that's actually I think why Pete and I work quite so well, because he's more originally creative. I'm probably a better editor than he is. I've done more technical stuff, the process stuff, the filming, the camera side, the production stuff, but he's very good on story, very good on characters, and very good animation. So they were kind of that's what I'm after.
Coats and bronze.
Yeah. God, I'm tired. I went to the Batters last night. You know, mutually comparable skills. Now, we're beginning with C. You know, one's got one, the other one's got the other. What's the word I'm after?
Okay. I don't know if this really relates to animation much, but film or digital?
Film or digital? Well, we shot on film a great deal. Shot a lot on 35. We shoot now entirely digitally. It's on digital SLRs. It's opened up a whole new approach. Having said that, when you go back to 35mm and scan it, it looks absolutely fantastic. So, you know, if you're going back to your old... I mean, we restored the Wallace and Gromit films, the half hours, going right back to the original camera negative. So that's all there, all that information's still there. But it's a clumsy process, and actually it's very hard now to go back to the original film process, which was shooting on film, getting it processed, getting prints made from that neg, using that print as a cutting copy, sending engine numbers off to neg cutter, and then striking prints from a cut neg. That process is almost, you can't do. The machinery, the Steambex, the editing machines aren't available. You don't really get neg cutters anymore, and almost nobody's printing film, certainly not in this country. So you shoot your film, you'll get it developed, and then you'll scan your neg to digits. So you're using it as a kind of, and this is the conclusion that we came to. We were finding we were using film purely as a carrier to get it into digital form. And for us, it was a very, very, very costly process, because you're sending off a lot of very short lengths. And the couriering costs to the lab in London, Technicolor, was almost more than the actual processing costs. And then it came back in digital form. So we thought, actually, why don't we just do this digitally? And now the cameras are so good. And certainly when you're beginning, it's so much easier. And you see your results immediately, so you can learn very, very quickly.
Why did you choose animation over live action?
Probably by accident, or at least that opportunity that came up. Probably I was thinking about becoming a live action cameraman. That's kind of when I was, I don't know, in my teens, I suppose, is what I was thinking I would do. Got into the animation thing. At one point almost went to the film school to do camera work, and actually didn't, because actually we were getting contracts for the BBC and Channel 4, so we kind of carried on. And it's it's quite interesting, because the stop frame model work, it's quite a skill, it's quite a discipline. In a live action world, broadly the same rules apply at how you're going to light a scene, but the physical nature of models means actually you've got to be a lot more precise. You don't get as wet, which is great because you're indoors most of the time. You don't get so cold, and you haven't got to deal with actors. So it's and actually once you realise you've got total control of lighting a set, and working closely with the art director and the model builders, and you have a huge amount of control on that. You're not beholden to very tight schedules or the weather, or whatever. So it's a good fun thing to do, actually.
Okay. I think I'm just going to check I haven't missed anything. I guess one question is, was there any sort of big people in Hollywood, like Ray Harryhausen or something, who helped you down the path to go into animation or to...
Well, yeah, when we started, there was a college as Farnham College of Art, which did an animation course, but it's traditional 2D drawn animation. When we were sort of in our teens and even early 20s, it was hard to find information. Now, we'd seen the Harryhausen films, Jason the Argonaut, Sinbad, Eye of the Tiger, and in fact, he shot quite a bit of them in Shepherd's Bush, and we tried to get to see him at one point and never did. We did go and see Ivor Wood when he was shooting the Wombles, for an hour or two, and it was interesting going around his little studio. Again, he was shooting on 16mm Bolexes. They were electrically operated. But actually, there were very few people in this country actually doing stop frames, so there's almost nowhere to go to. So we were kind of, you're looking at books, you're looking at films, and kind of making it up as you went along. But certainly, Pete in particular was very inspired by the Harryhausen films, and we met him over the years, much later. We met him several times over the years, so it was great to meet him because he was quite an inspiration. Now, everything's on YouTube. All you need to know, it's there at a click of a mouse. There's a lot more information out there than there was in the sort of 60s and 70s. And actually, that's the answer to that is you just work bloody hard on them.
Yeah.
That is the hardest bit. And that's a question that's worth asking your other contributors, really, and indeed each other. How do you develop an idea? It's something we're going to be talking to the college about, actually, is writing across platform, across sort of digital platform, how you structure narratives to go across those various platforms.